Hi, you tune in to Ask Dr. Kat, and I'm Dr. Katherine Williams. I'm here today with my lovely co-host, Alexis Dixon. Hi, Alexis.
Hi, Dr. Kat. How are you?
Hope it's okay that I introduce you and describe you as the lovely Alexis Dixon.
I'll take that.
I'm just very happy to have you back. Alexis has been traveling for a while, so I'm just really pleased to have him back in San Diego and co-hosting alongside with me. So today we have a topic that Alexis in particular has a lot of experience in, which is mediation. So we have Scott Levin, Chief Peacekeeper, who is a divorce attorney specializing in mediations. And we also have Karen Bonnell, who is a divorce and co-parent coach. And Karen, you help parents develop their parenting plans. Is that right?
I do.
Yeah, great. So without further ado, let's get started. We've got a lot to talk about today. Alexis?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we should probably start with is a definition of divorce mediation and your approach to it. So, Karen, I know you're in Seattle, in Kirtland, Washington. Glad you can join us up there. And since you're the furthest away, can you kind of give a definition of divorce mediation and your approach to divorce mediation? What can someone expect when they come to you?
You bet. You know, Alexis, the thing about divorce mediation, particularly when it has to do with children, but certainly finances also, and I know Scott will speak to this, at the end of a divorce, you're going to be parents for the rest of your life. And so maintaining a sense of family for children is really antithetical to a litigation process where parents are actually encouraged to tear each other apart or to compete, where there are winners and losers. And so I really invite people into my office to talk about how to uncouple, how to take apart that intimate partner relationship in such a way that they can more healthily be able to co-parent together. And that's not necessarily easy, but it is important. In that process, we then develop a developmentally appropriate, which means ages and stages of children are considered as we do a child-centered parenting plan. It's a mediation process. It's facilitative. There's no pressure. There's no putting the thumb on someone to force them to make decisions. It's thoughtful, it's durable, and it's informed.
It sounds very civilized, Karen.
It's highly civilized.
Scott, how about you? I mean, how would you define divorce mediation, and what is your approach to divorce mediation?
Well, I think it's important that we first kind of define what divorce litigation really is. And as a former litigator, now I have not seen the inside of a courtroom since 2012.
That's why you look so relaxed.
Thank you. The lovely Scott Levin, and of course the lovely Karen. You know, the first thing that all litigators do when they're first hired in the family law context is they ask for a position statement from their clients. And that position statement basically is asking the client to bring up all the yuck that went on between the two parties and that got them to the point of divorce. And the average litigated divorce in Southern California, at least, is taking over a little over 2 years. And so it's a 2-year plus process of looking behind you, as opposed to the direction where you're really going, which is in front. And it really can be traumatizing to people because it is a process where there will be a winner and a loser. And when I was litigating, I really came to the conclusion in early 2012, after a number of years of practicing, that I really didn't feel like I had won any cases for any of my clients during my litigation career. And that's because they had paid way too much. It had taken way too much time. The emotional damage was off a lot of the times almost quasi-permanent. And the fact is, as Karen mentioned, that when you are co-parents, you are co-parents for life, and your kids are impacted by the continuing tension and fighting that goes on between parents during the divorce and post-divorce. And so what I like to think mediation is essentially is that it's a future-focused process. I oftentimes don't know why my clients are getting divorced. I don't ask, really. It's none of my business. We're there to focus on, we know why they're here, they've gotten to my office, and now how can we help these two people move forward in a quick, affordable, and kid-focused process, so that they can not make their kids, not to give their kids the burden of having to think at their high school graduation or their wedding or their college graduation, where's mom gonna sit? Where's dad gonna sit? We better make sure that they're not too close to each other. Mediation is all about future-focused and amicable solutions with a professional that is a creative mind that's capable of helping two parties move forward.
You know, as a mediator myself, I really love the language we're using here. And yet we know that marriage is one of those things where we utter these words, till death do us part. And we take that quite seriously, because we don't say this in the privacy of our home. We say this at a very expensive party with lots of people watching. So when this does not go right, as lovely as the concept of mediation is, how does divorce mediation manage the appropriate anger that comes with this breach of this agreement and commitment to each other in the face of our friends and our family? How does divorce mediation manage the pain and the anger? Because I might be with someone who, and Scott, you talked about right and wrong, I may be with someone who I thought did me wrong, and damn it, I want to get it right. I want to win, because broke my heart. I said to him, till death, or her, till death do us part. So how does mediation navigate the pain and the history of this broken heart?
Well, Alexis, if I can just jump in before Scott answers, I say to my parents, my co-parents who are sitting in my office, when you uttered those words, I literally say, until death do you part, little did you know that that was referring to your role as parents. That is the part that will be until death do you part. That is not ending.
So you define the language of till death do us part, not to each other as adults, but to our children. We're saying till death do us part to the potential of, to the possibility, or to the lives of the give birth to. Can you
to each other, because children, it's not a question of am I going to co-parent. The question is, how skillfully will I co-parent? If we've had a child together, or adopted a child together, or had a one-night stand and now there's a child, we are going to be co-parenting that child no matter what. Even if one of us absences ourselves, that child will always wonder about that other parent. And our obligation to our children are to co-parent as skillfully as we can. It doesn't mean we need to be friends. It's not a kumbaya situation. It's a set of skills, it's respect, and it's civility.
Scott, anything to add at all?
It's a really tough question when you're dealing with people that have really high emotions and that are angry in mediation. I try to appeal really to the bottom line, which is, do you want to have a relationship going forward that allows you to co-parent your kids effectively? And what's really the price of peace? It's a tough question, though. I mean, when people are really angry and they're willing to, burn it to the ground before they'll give the other side assent, what do you, in that situation, Alexis, what do you think? How do you approach cases like that?
I think they come to us because they're angry. And I think we have to allow a certain space for that anger to be expressed. And so part of the work I do with couples is to just acknowledge, yeah, you said till death do you part, and here we are now. And one of the things I attempt to do is I attempt to have the couple look back and say, when you said till death do you part, who were the people that said that? Are the two people who's sitting in front of me the same two people who got married? And oftentimes they may say no. the guy I was then or the woman I was then is a radically different person than I am now. And so we talk about unpacking the journey collectively and individually to where they are now. But what I love that Karen said is that parenting as a skill. Can you talk about parenting as a skill and not this intuitive thing that I have a baby and I just simply know what to do? Can you talk about, I've got a dear friend who said, being a parent is easy. Being a good parent is really, really hard. So can you talk about parenting as a skill set?
Sure, and it's a really important question in terms of how do we parent in one home looks very different than how we parent as separated adults. It just is different. It's a different skill set. And so learning about growth and development and learning about developmental needs and learning about the skills that meet those are all part of building those skills and recognizing that, Alexis, if you and I shared a child and I had all my mom stuff going and you had all your dad stuff going, of course I'm being totally stereotypic, you'd have to learn how to be a dad mom and I would have to learn how to be a mom dad. We would both want to make sure that we carried a skill set for both structure and nurturing. And sometimes I find that I have to say, you know, good parenting is good parenting in one home or two. And so I really help parents appreciate that part of what will mitigate the difficulty of restructuring a family for children, in other words, the impact of divorce, is how skillfully they can usher their children through that change. And that's a parenting skill set that I assure them they can learn, right? I think part of the answer to the question about high conflict and high emotion is that if I have parents who are really mad at each other as adults, and I give them, of course, space, as you said, Alexis, to sort of debrief some of that, and then I say to them, and you know what, right now I'd really like to hear about your kids. Oh my goodness, I watched two adults get transformed right in front of my eyes. Well, let me tell you about Aaron, and let me tell you about Natalie. I want to hear what it's like to dad Aaron. What's it like to mom Natalie, or vice versa, right? And suddenly I have two very different adults in my office. And that's a big part of what we need to build on when we're mediating a parenting plan.
Sounds to me, Karen, like you're changing the focus from the relationship to death do us part as the spouses, and now it's really to the children that you're changing your focus now, and really it's for the children.
It's as parents for the children. Neither one of us are leaving our kids, right? We're not leaving our kids. I'm leaving you, not the kids.
Yeah.
And so as a consequence of that, how we work together will have a direct impact on what our children carry into their adulthood. And we might as well start right now. I never tell them it'll be easy. I just tell them that they can do it. And I'll be with them through it.
And Karen, you mentioned that. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Well, it's just interesting what you said, Karen, because today was in a very, very, very difficult mediation, very emotional. And I noticed that the youngest child had just had his birthday on Saturday. And I said, just let me take a second and just acknowledge happy birthday to your son. And just the tension just left the room. They just told me about the party and the presents and the happiness, and it like really allowed us to move forward where I wasn't sure where we were going at the time because it was just very emotional.
Right. Those little ones have so much pull on their hearts, and they really are the future. Alexis, when you talk about the future, that's where the future is. It's in raising those 2 beautiful, 3 beautiful, 5 beautiful children into adulthood. And they need both their parents.
I love how you've separated it for me, because I love a couple coming in and having a conversation with them as a couple, as husband and wife, and then talking about them as parents. And those are 2 very different conversations. Can you talk about your approaches? And I think you already have, but can you expand a little bit on the approach between a couple coming in and mediating them as husband and wife, and then mediating them as parents? Can you talk about that?
One of the pieces that I find can be really disruptive to mediation is when the parents have not had a complete conversation about the fact that the relationship is over. And so sometimes that's where I need to start. One parent may be bargaining or hoping or wishing or adapting in hopes that this is all going to go away, or I'm going to wake up in the morning and it's not going to be true. And so sometimes that's the first conversation is, are you done? Yes, I'm done. And have them have that conversation with each other. I literally say to them, you know, one day there was a husband and wife, or two parents, two women, two men, whatever, who married, or they had a child together. Then they became parents. These are two different levels of relationship. And your conflict and disappointment and hurt and betrayal and everything that's going on that causes you so much pain is up here. It's up here. When I ask you to drop down here and tell me about Aaron and Natalie, notice how you feel. This relationship brings you enormous joy, right? This is where your heart lives. So I really help parents distinguish between spouse mind, what I call spouse mind, and parent mind. And all that conflict is up here. And I remind them that as hard as it is, we don't want that bleeding down into their parent mind, onto their children. They get that. They get the part about it bleeding down onto their children. They don't want that.
I think that's the part that many of us see, right? Our friends, maybe perhaps ourselves, we see that part bleeding down. Are there proactive things that parents can do to try to avoid that from happening?
There really are. I mean, obviously the self-care pieces are incredibly important. I mean, I'll say to parents, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Sometimes it's obvious that they're not eating or sleeping, and I get them back to their healthcare provider. And I talk about, look, the one thing you can do for your children right now is making sure you get a good night's sleep, that sort of thing, right? Stress management, this and that, and this and that. But the next thing, honestly, parents want to do the right thing. Sometimes they just don't know what it is. So I give them the rules. I really do. I just say, okay, here's the rules. If you follow these rules, you'll be on the right track. Parents will sometimes say, but I don't feel that, whatever the rules are. And I go, I get it. Sometimes if we do the right thing, our feelings will follow. As counterintuitive as that may be right this minute, if you just trust me, I want you to try and do the right thing, and your feelings will follow. You're grieving. Grieving is complicated. I name it, right? Mm-hmm. So lots of teaching.
Karen, before we go on to the next step, which is how to follow those rules, I just want to go back a little bit to that first part. You talked about self-care, and Alexis, going back to what you said earlier about that parents are angry. They come in the room and they're really angry. And Scott, we talked about what's going on for them, and really, Karen, you just named it. They're grieving. They're grieving the death of their relationship, or their marriage, at least, and the romantic or intimate relationship.
Their faith and their vows. I mean, it's just endless what they're grieving.
Yeah, and so I think of when we look at the psychology piece of it, and you have someone with anger, how do you manage that? And so, of course, there are anger management, or what we call emotion regulation. We all have big emotions. Especially in a divorce, these emotions are not only okay, but they're so normal. It would be atypical not to feel angry or grief or even trauma from some of these experiences as you're experiencing the death of this relationship, right, or this intimate relationship as you know it. And so, what we do then is, I wonder, is for you guys, do you refer your clients to psychologists to kind of deal with those, learn how to deal with those emotions, how to manage those emotions? Is that something that comes up for you? Or do you recommend it? I mean, is it something that you think parents should do?
I do. I think it's an important piece, like Karen said. I think self-care is a really important part of the process. And that goes beyond, you sleeping and eating and working out. It's if you're going to be re-entering the workforce, you have to try to eliminate the fear of the unknown, in my opinion. So you need to get in touch with a career counselor and start focusing on your next steps, because when you're moving forward, the fear of the unknown kind of goes away because you're taking responsibility and ownership over the process. And the same thing goes with even the boredom of the asset and debt division. When you really fill out these forms and you get the paperwork together and you do that work and you don't hand it over to an attorney and just say, I don't know what I'm doing, can you do it for me? I mean, when you take ownership over each of these steps, it makes you feel like you're getting control, and control eliminates the fear of the unknown. And of course, I mean, there's divorce coaches and therapists. It's definitely a part of the process that I recommend for both parties going through, this divorce process.
Yeah, it's such a textured thing. I think when couples go through, I think, Kevin, you talked about winning and losing. And I've seen couples who've been through the traditional divorce, and one may win and the other may lose, but they both still carry the emotional, I'll use this word, the emotional trauma, the emotional signature of the relationship, right? And I find that when couples come through the divorce process, the divorce mediation process, they're able to have conversations in the divorce mediation process that they don't normally have in the traditional courtroom, where the judge tells them who's right and who's wrong, or their lawyer presents the best case and this lawyer wins and the other one loses. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the emotional, that the mediation just isn't looking at the financial aspect of the separation? I kind of want to get in, but it also gives a voice. I did a divorce mediation between a husband and wife. She was a doctor. He was a software engineer. And the third, fourth time we met, she was saying something to him. And I said, so what you're saying to him is such and such and such. And she said, yes. And I said, are you hearing that? And he said, I've never heard that. And she said, I've been telling you this for 20 years and you've never listened to me. And he said, but you've never said it this way. You've never said it this way. And that's something that would not happen in a traditional courtroom, right? And what happened, and tell me if you've ever had this, what happened when I caucused with them was he said, I'd like to get back. I recognize I've been with my wife for 20 years and I've never listened to her. I mean, that's such a powerful, profound. I've been with my wife for 20 years and I'm realizing it took this divorce mediation for me to hear what she's saying to me. I'd like to reconcile. Have you ever had a situation where you were working with a couple and one of them had an epiphany that, I think I'd like to give this a second chance? And how do you deal with that? What do you do with that?
And I don't know if it's happened for you or not. With
me?
Yeah.
It's happened, and I feel I think it's a blessing. I mean, I once did some advertising that said something along the lines of, don't get divorced, but if you're going to get divorced, do it the right way. So I'm not, Mr. Divorce hoping that people get divorced, but I will say that what you're speaking to, Alexis, is really the impact of that communication. It can be seen in the fact that, about 50% of litigated divorces end up back in court post-divorce. And that number is a fraction for mediated divorces. And it's because people learn how to communicate and listen. And I think it's great when they get back together. I do think there's certainly they have a long road to go to really, make it stick. But I definitely have had that happen. And it's a great feeling to file that document with the court, withdrawing the petition.
Scott, you mentioned communication. Oh, sorry, Alexis. I just wanted to ask about that communication piece, because it's something that the three of you have in spades, right? You know how to communicate and in a way that is effective and it helps to bring down the level of conflict. And with my psychologist hat on, I think of, all the studies that I read on divorce and the harm to children. And really, it's not the divorce itself. but rather it's the high level of conflict or conflictual communication styles between the two parties. And so it's almost like this magical world that each of you are in, where you know how to communicate. And so I wonder, what do you do? Like, I just think of, do I refer these clients to take communication courses? Like, what can they do? What can parents do if we know we're about to, separate in the next, upcoming year, and we want to have a go at it in a way that is less conflict, to help our children, get through this less scathed, and we want to take communication courses, or what can we do there to help with that piece?
Well, for me, I think the piece that I keep hearing Alexis touch on, and Scott, of course, reinforcing as well, is not to be afraid of the conflict or the anger.
Yeah.
And it's critical that the clients, that the co-parents know, I'm not afraid of their upset. That's not the point. And sometimes all it takes is going into those pain points with them. I think of the times when somebody is so bereft about an affair, right? Like, let's just talk about it for a minute, because what, a third maybe of my folks, that's part of the dynamic that's operating, right? So there's someone who's completely heartbroken, and someone else who's, feels like they're doing opium because they're in this new relationship. I mean, it's just such a difference in where they are. And I'll give permission to say, can you sit there while I work with your soon-to-be ex-spouse on their pain? And then I'll do that kind of just go into the pain point, a la, Daniel Siegel, or whoever you want to identify with this. I'm a compassionate listening trainer by history, Israel, Palestine. I can sit with both sides. German-Jewish reconciliation, I can sit with both sides. That's what it's like sometimes having co-parents in my office. So sitting there and going into that pain point and modeling, back to what you're asking, Kat, is just modeling. This is how you listen. I'm not afraid of seeing you. I'm not afraid of hearing you. And maybe for the first time, the other person who's now listening and witnessing this, they too are healed by that, because they're like, I had no idea. I never meant that. I would have never wanted that for you, right? Like, that's then where the conversation can go. We often miss in a situation where there's been an affair that one person has sort of been the victim and the other one is the persecutor, and that's typically not actually true. And so again, there's a whole circle of healing there as well.
Scott, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, for whatever reason in my mind, I'm thinking, the four of us kind of know it's a divorce, right in the heart of the divorce. Of course, the emotions and anger and all that is very high, but what's coming down the road isn't necessarily going to get any easier when boyfriend or girlfriend are introduced to the situation. Blended families, these things are oftentimes going to get more complicated. And just the fact is that the litigation system is ill-equipped to help these people get ready for that and prepare for it. Karen, do you bring up ever the possibility of what's coming down the road in new relationships during your work?
Absolutely. When we're talking about holidays and optimistic parents who've actually agreed to get divorced, who are going to share every Christmas Eve and every Christmas together, or whatever, every Thanksgiving, they're just so full of conscious uncoupling. And then I say, okay, I love your optimism. I love your sense of family for your children. Let's walk together on this one. And then I gently walk them into new romantic partners. I literally will say, I would say to you, Scott, if you were one of my co-parents, now look, Scott, when you fall in love, I want your beloved to know they're going to get you. They're going to get your beautiful, beautiful kids. How lucky is that? And guess what? They're going to get Kat. Right? Because she's not going anywhere. So your new beloved needs to really understand that she's joining a family system where there's a really wonderful mom. And she's an involved mom. And then I walk through the other side of that, right? And I say, Kat, blah, 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 right? So yeah, it is on the table, because Otherwise, we're just kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And if we create a parenting plan that does not make space for step family when we have children, and I don't care if they're adult children, frankly, we are really doing a disservice to the adults in front of us and their children.
How do you both define, as you know, as you're talking, I'm just putting all these divorce mediations I've done in my head and all the scenarios, and the anger piece, how much time I spend on the anger piece, because underneath all that anger, if I took it and put it here, what I find is two people who are very, very hurt. And they're hurt because at some point in their mind, it felt like they became invisible to the other person, right? Like when we don't feel heard, we feel invisible. We feel like, I'm standing here. Are you not hearing me, right? And the pain becomes much worse if I feel that what I'm asking you for, you can give to me, but you're not giving it to me. And then the question is, but I see and I've evaluated that you can give this to me, so why aren't you giving it to me? Why are you punishing me, right? And the longer I hold that, no, I start withholding and I stop giving, right? And so now we're here, we're standing, call it a Mexican standoff. And that takes all kinds of expressions, right? I can have an affair. I can not tell you how much money I make. I can hide my income from you. I can, be naughty in 1,000 different ways. And at the same time, the people who pay the price for that is the children, right? The children are watching these two adults really in battle. And I really want to put a lot of emphasis on the adults in the relationship being extremely mindful that they may be angry with each other, justifiably so. But how do you hold the anger with the adults and still be mindful of the children? How do we do that? As communication professionals, as medias, what can we say to parents who are still together but are in that place of anger with each other? What can they do to be mindful of the children?
Scott?
Well, what I like to tell people, I transitioned my practice from litigation to mediation the year that I had my first kid, my first son. And I could just no longer be a part of a process that I knew was hurting families. And so what I discovered as a father myself is that my kids are half myself and half my wife. And when I say something about my wife or when my clients say something about their spouses in front of their children or, around their children or, give that aura off, they're really attacking their children because their children can't remove the half of themselves that are being attacked. And so I think that I try to point that out. And I don't shy away from the anger. When in my rules of our mediation sessions, I do say we're not going to spend time attacking each other, but that's different than hearing each other's, intimate thoughts and allowing the person to say what they wanted to say for however long they needed to get it out and to quietly listen and not respond, because we're no longer there to fix the relationship. We're there to hear the other person and to acknowledge that, yes, I understand you feel that way. And thank you for sharing. As hard as it is, it's no longer countering and just waiting for the person to take a breath so that it's your turn to jump in and say what you want to say. And I just feel that all of that kind of works together again to set people up for better success down the road.
Scott, how are you different? And Karen, how are you different because you're a mediator? I've met people who've practiced law and say when they became mediators, they were, what did one guy said to me? He said, my wife liked me a lot better when I became a mediator, and I liked me better. How does that inform you in being a mediator? How does that translate into who you are as a person?
Go ahead, Karen. I've jumped in.
You know what, I want to say in response to what you were talking about, Scott, and then I think it fits with the answer to your question, Alexis, which is I sometimes have to have a very loving conversation with my co-parents about how disappointing it is to realize that they were unable to love each other the way they needed to be loved. And oftentimes that anger and pain and hurt is all sitting on top of that very truth. We were unable to do this, no matter how hard we tried or how much we wanted it. And so sometimes just being with them in that helps move that grieving process from the profound anger and wanting to strike out into the next layer of sadness that's just right. We couldn't, we didn't, and we're sad. And we're sad for our kids, right? And so if you were going to ask, how has it changed me to do a mediator? I'm a nurse by training. So all of that family nursing, I never did med-surg. I did all the other kinds of nursing, but not med-surg. Don't show me a rash, please. But what I would say is that it takes an enormous amount of compassion, if you will, or being aware of judgments. I think one of the most harmful pieces of going through a divorce for adults is the judgments that they live with. Both the judgments of themselves and each other, but also judgments from the outside. You know, what people say about them, what people are going to say about their family, their kids. Judgment is a very destructive energy. And so I find myself working with that on a pretty regular basis. And I would say that's changed me.
It's interesting. You know, as you were speaking about that, I was thinking of the idea of winning and losing. And Scott, you hit on that, and I want to come back again. You know, in mediation, what I talk about is gaining. I don't talk about winning or losing, but what is the gain? Because oftentimes we can win and still feel empty, right? Oh, and we can lose and feel empty. So the fact that I won doesn't always fulfill me. So outside of winning and losing, Scott and Karen, what do we go to? What's the opposite, or what's the other construct outside of winning and losing in a divorce mediation or in a divorce?
I think, personally, I think coming out on the other side with a fair, equitable solution where both parents have ongoing and continual contact with their children and there's no alienation. I think that is what I would define as somewhat of a successful divorce. And I often hearken back to, no matter what we figure out in this room, I promise you, you will be better off than if you were to hand it over to a judge who 2 minutes before you walk up looks at a piece of paper for the first time and introduces themselves to your case. They don't know the kids.
That's good.
Are very good and skillful at making it very difficult to determine if there is a bad actor, who that bad actor is. So I just think that allowing the parties to formulate their own creative solutions leaves people better off than the alternative, no matter what.
I think we're
Yeah,
also
I would absolutely agree. I mean, the opposite of winning and losing is to move out of competition, a competitive frame, and it would be cooperation. It would be co-creating. It's co-creating a parenting plan together. It's co-creating a financial settlement together, one that I understand how we got here. Scott, it's back to your comment about empowerment. How empowering is it to know how you got where you got for the right reasons? I might not be completely happy with the fact that we're both running in the red at the end of all this, which is what we discovered if we try and keep the family home, but I get it. Right? And together we've come up with solutions for that. We're going to use your RSUs or your something else to help us get through the next 18 months. We got there together. And that process is incredibly important to the future. Incredibly important.
It's a great lesson to leave your kids.
Yeah.
Say that again, please, Scott. I missed that.
Great lesson to leave your kids, that you were able to do it differently, that you defeated the system that is rigged against you. Hollywood teaches us to run off, hire lawyers, fight, win, 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 lose, lose. And you were able to do it a different, better way. It's an incredible lesson to leave your kids.
Scott, I'm hearing like it's taking lemons and making lemonade out of it. You know, that you've got an unfortunate ending of a relationship, and yet you can model for your kids. You can teach your kids resilience, how to work through problems together and work through conflict, so that perhaps they can themselves, as they experience conflict as they get older, are able to learn how to manage their own situations that come up. Karen, if you could, and one of the things that you talked about earlier is that second step. The first step is the parents and their own emotions, and the second step is how to do that co-parenting plan, how to develop that. Could you, that's sort of this black hole for me, mystery. Could you shed some light on that?
You bet. So once I get parents talking about their children and what their hopes and interests are, what they want the future to look like, then we start kind of in a psychoeducative process about how to get there. And, there's a lot these days around schedules, 50-50 schedules, and, is that the gold standard, and what's going to be best for our kids? And I've been a stay-at-home parent, so of course the children should be with me. And, I've heard it all, right? And so we just take that really, really slow. And we talk about what's our end goal. And Scott's been really, just repetitive about this, a strong and engaged relationship with your kids. This is about the rest of their lives. You said yourself, Kat, the research is clear. It's not divorce that hurts children. It's the process that can be enormously damaging if we don't do it skillfully. So I just keep walking with them and talking with them about what's the best way to get there. The other thing is one size doesn't fit all, and that we can develop schedules, parenting time schedules, in what I call tiers or steps, so that maybe today what makes sense for your little ones is this, and after 6 months or a period of time, we're going to do that. And then by summer, now we can drop into that 50-50 schedule that may have enormous symbolic value. I always reassure parents, you are 100% parents. You are now sharing responsibility for your children in a sequential manner. And so, it's those kinds of things. Meanwhile, teaching. How do you make joint decisions? What do you do if you get in dispute? What if one of you wants your daughter to go to an all-girls middle school and the other one wants her in public school? We practice, we walk it through. What about medical decision-making? So by the time they leave, and you might think, is it like, are they in like for 6 months? Like, no, we do all that in about 5 to 8 hours. So I tell parents, somewhere between 5-6 hours or so, we're going to have a well-written parenting plan that you're going to know how to implement. We're going to talk about holidays and school breaks, and we're going to talk about how to celebrate a birthday in a way that doesn't result in kids feeling caught in the middle, right? So,
is it the process, Karen?
Say again?
Is it the process that they're learning, like the skills?
It is a process.
And then whatever the conflict is, you can apply whatever new conflict that comes up to that process.
Right. And meanwhile, because we are meeting across some period of time, inevitably things are coming up, right? So something has actually happened in real time in between one appointment and the next, which, by the way, I don't typically work in 4 to 8 hour blocks. I typically work in 90-minute to 2-hour blocks, in some ways to allow for those things to come up so that we can, in real time, solve real co-parenting issues, right? Which just makes it much more functional. Plus, people don't get so fatigued.
Coaching part of it.
Pardon me?
That's the coaching part of it. You're coaching them through those real life situations.
Right.
I don't have anything against my mediator friends that do their whole mediations in 1 4-hour block. I don't work that way either, because I think it's a shortcut. I think that you're able to get to a deal, sure, which is the end goal, but you're not really allowing the parties, it's like a fine bottle of wine. You have to let it breathe. And you have to give them the space between appointments. I do weekly appointments to, allow them to really get that full range of communication out, in my opinion.
I call it a little bit like when you buy a car and you go to the dealership and they let you take it home for the weekend before you actually sign on the dotted line. I remind them that any good decision we make today is going to be a good decision on Monday. And if it's not, then it wasn't a good decision in the first place. So don't be afraid of that.
And I think that's the power of mediation. And I really want to stress that divorce mediation. The couple makes the decision about how they're going to move forward. Not a judge, not someone they've never met before, but they get to set the rules and the parameters as to how they want to move forward. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. What they're entitled to know, Alexis, is if they start to wander off, far out into the outer edges of what would be typical, but as long as it's safe for kids, they can even do things that are atypical. This is their family, their children, they are the parents. And again, unless they're doing something that I think could be harmful to kids, just as long as they know, yeah, they're the parents, it's their family.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a right couple for divorce mediation? Is there a right couple, or some couples who aren't right for divorce mediation, or is any couple? I mean, there may be a couple who's looking at this and think, I don't think this feels, I'm too angry to go through divorce mediation. Or there may be a couple who are thinking, we've really thought about this, we've had all these conversations, and it's kind of over. Is there a profile of the right couple for divorce mediation?
Well, I would just like to take a big vote for, if you're really angry, but you're basically a healthy person, you belong in divorce mediation. It's so much safer to deal with the high emotion of losing a relationship and restructuring a family in mediation. It'll be used in litigation as a weapon. Your anger, your upset, your betrayal, and that's the last thing you actually want at the end of the day. But I would say that there is a profile of people who don't belong in mediation, or at least I will decline working with. And that is someone who is pretty seriously characterologically harmed, that they themselves have been through so much that they're not actually capable of being honest or fair or reliable in any sort of decision-making way. Or they are really incapable of not wielding power in a way that is intimidating to the other people involved, that they can't stop themselves. So those would be the two places where I will suggest that they use another process.
Scott, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Karen completely. But a lot of people think that there's the high conflict couples, can't do mediation. And what I say to those couples is, just from a total practical position, start in mediation. You'll be shocked at what you can agree on, and
Right.
what you can't agree on, you'll take to litigation. But if you hold your agreements that you solved in mediation yourself, you'll only limit the lawyers to what's left. So if there's 20% of your case that you couldn't solve in mediation, then they'll fight and you'll go to litigation over that remaining 20%. But you'll save, from a practical position, a lot of money and a lot of time by limiting the scope of what is in dispute.
And just for those folks looking on who are not familiar with mediation, if I decide to come into mediation, does that negate me from having a lawyer to represent me? Am I coming in? And as mediator, are you representing one side or the other? So can you talk about my ability to legally protect myself through the mediation process, and who you may or may not be representing in the mediation process?
Yeah, it's a common misconception, actually. So most of my clients are represented with attorneys, but the attorneys don't come in, most of the time, don't come into the mediation sessions. So you have an opportunity to engage an attorney or even a financial expert. Sometimes I tell clients that they might want to explore, if they're limited in funds, they might be better off getting a financial expert to help them cultivate, their knowledge about what their rights and you know, what the best advice would be in terms of the asset and debt division. But you can get an attorney at the very beginning of the process once you engage a mediator that helps you plan and strategize for, you know, what you should be asking for. You can consult with that attorney after each mediation session and forward them the mediator's notes and summary about what went on and say, okay, well, this is what we talked about. What do you think about this? And or you could wait for a draft of your settlement agreement to be drafted and then consult with an attorney if you want to really limit the scope so that the attorney is just saying, you know, I'm reviewing your marital settlement agreement draft and giving you advice just, you know, to protect your interests and to validate if there's anything that's really harmful in there and against your best interests.
This is the first I've heard of a financial expert. So I assume this is an expert who knows about divorce specifically, the divorce laws. And so when might I choose a financial expert over a divorce attorney to look at my finances?
Well, don't get me started. You know, I tell my friends that are divorce attorneys, and I have lots of them, that I'm happy to go to lunch with you. I just wouldn't hire you. And, you know, that's really my, you know, I know that's harsh, but a financial expert, there's a certification called a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. I'm actually one myself. But yeah, I think a financial expert oftentimes is, if you're limited in funds that you could spend, you know, if you can only do one or the other, that person can help you fill out your financial forms, evaluate your spouse's financial forms, and put a strategy together for what you should be asking for. The dirty little secret about divorce is that there's three main issues that we all do over and over and over. Now, Karen does them incredibly well. I mean, I'm in awe of what I've heard from her tonight, but you know, it's about splitting your assets and debts, creating a parenting plan, and figuring out child and spousal support. And of course, there are more issues here and there and unique issues that come up, but a lot of times it's just not that complicated. And the financial expert, the certified divorce financial analyst, can oftentimes, I think, be a better spend to help you understand your financial rights.
Yeah, particularly if you're both clear that you want the divorce, having the financial expert is huge. And I've used one before in divorce, and it was better than a lawyer for that kind of thing.
Wow, so that's
in our area, the mediators that I work with are typically CDFAs by training, the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, and they function as both the CDFA and the mediator in the role as a neutral. So it's not like people are hiring financial specialists. I don't know if that was clear on their own. They're hiring that person as a couple. Yeah, so they're functioning as a neutral. The other thing that may be a jurisdictional difference, when couples enter mediation with me, all of that is protected. And it doesn't mean they can't consult with attorneys. By goodness, they certainly can. And I would say maybe 50% are represented when they come into my office. Sometimes I'm the very first person they've talked to. They haven't talked to an attorney yet. They want to know how to tell their children. They want to be prepared, right, for next steps. But what I would say is that notes from my sessions, they can't be used in litigation. They're protected. And I think it's really important, if that's true in California as well, that people know that they can have open and honest and raw conversations, and they're protected. That whatever is done there, unless it's by agreement, can't then be turned around and used against them in court, which I think is part of the value, that safety, that confidentiality is really critical.
So I just want to be clear on that. Mediation cannot be used for discovery.
Right.
Right.
Right. They can't take the work from mediation. They can't take my emails. They cannot take that and use it in any sort of expert way. You know, given that I've written the book and done the things, I'm very, very clear. You can't use me as a weapon. I care too much about the work I do. Yeah.
they can't ask you to come to testify on behalf of one or the other as well. I just want to be really clear about that mediation is not a process. It is confidential, cannot be used for discovery, and the mediator cannot be called to court to testify on behalf of either one of the spouses, which is huge.
It's huge. It's a big safety factor.
Karen, you mentioned your book, and I just wanted to show our audience a couple of the books that you've published, and these are available very easily on Amazon. Are there any small publishers also, or small bookstores that also carry these too?
Absolutely, and they're at this point they're in most libraries. So, and they can certainly request any independent bookstore would get them for them. The Parenting Plan Workbook has actually contributions from professionals on 5 continents, and or from 5 countries rather, excuse me. And that's written along with that is a whole series of videos that support the workbook that parents can listen to free on my YouTube page, and it talks about how to think about preparing to do a parenting plan at each stage of the parenting planning process.
And you mentioned your YouTube, and here's one that I watched, and I was just really so touched by, and it's how to tell kids that you're getting a divorce.
Right.
And I watched this, and I was really touched by it, and I highly recommend this. I think there are almost 50,000 people who also did watch it already too.
A couple, yeah.
Karen, I didn't know that. 50,000 views. That's amazing.
It's probably the one. It's the one thing that parents will leave my office after we've talked about how to tell their children, and they'll go and practice with it. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then I'm just mindful of the time. We're kind of rounding up on the hour here. And one thing I wanted to also ask is kind of moving forward. Karen, you mentioned something in our production meeting that what your hopes and your dreams of how divorce or separation will look like in the future. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have a small initiative that in 2025, my hope would be that 80% of couples who are facing a family restructuring would do that through mediation or other collaborative dispute resolution process. We didn't talk about collaborative divorce, but that's another non-litigation process, right? And so my hope is that the first step would be to contact people like Scott or Alexis or you, Kat, so that you could refer them to us, but that they would start with the lowest level of intervention that might result in conflict. What I tell people all the time is, if this falls apart, if we're not able to do the work that you need us to do, litigation is always waiting there.
That's right.
And so, you're not taking anything off the table because you've started here. You've really offered yourself a chance to do it in a self-determined and empowered way.
Scott, anything left to say? Anything you'd like to share with us?
I think, Dr. Kat, when you approached me to join you tonight, you should have warned me that I was going to be joined by these 2 amazing people. I'm totally outarmed and outgunned. But I think you guys are incredible, and I appreciate the work that you all do on behalf of all the clients that you're out there helping. So thank you.
Scott, you said something I think that epitomizes our time together. And I really want parents to hear that particular piece is that, when you have a child, half of that child is you and half of that child is your spouse. And if you were to berate your spouse in the presence of your child, you're berating a half of who that child is. And so that words matter, language matters when you have children in your home, and you have to actually prize that. That's the centralized theme in the home, that as adults, one of the things that Dr. Kat and I talk about, she hears me say all the time, that love is a verb. Hollywood has told us that love is a feeling. And then you get married and you realize, oh no, it's anything but a feeling. It's actually a verb, it's a behavior. And the question is, and I love what you said, Karen, and I share that with you. I hold that vision that we start to learn that love is a behavior. And that even if it doesn't go the way we want it to, we can still behave lovingly to ourselves and the other person. And I think that's where the three of us come in, including the four of us come in. And that just because you're angry and just because you're disappointed, certainly what Scott Peck calls, or David White calls, the broken heart, just simply because your heart is broken doesn't necessitate you not loving yourself or loving the other. And so if we can navigate that, if we can somehow get close to that and approximate that, I think your vision, Karen, will be realized. But it's been a beautiful journey. It's been a very informative and very lovely journey to take this time with you guys. Thanks for saying yes to us. Dr. Kat, you always bring amazing people together. So
Such an honor. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
yeah.
So clear with all the three of you here. So thank you again, Karen Bonnell, Scott Levin, Chief Peacekeeper, and of course our lovely Alexis
We're
Dixon.
all
All three lovelies. Thank you so much again, and have a good evening.
Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.